And Dr. Hamzawi, please come on up.
Sure.
And
good morning. Thank you very much, Khaled. It's a pleasure to be here. Since I have 12 minutes, let me start right away by looking at the subject matter, which is a drafting process of Egypt's new constitution. And let me outline a couple of critical remarks and to let you know where I'm coming from. I belong to a group of MPs in the former parliamentarians in the former People's Assembly, which decided as a constituent assembly. The Constituent Assembly is the assembly to draft the constitution as it was elected for the first time, which decided to withdraw, and in the second time decided to boycott the elections. And we decided in the first time to boycott the elections to withdraw, and in the first time and in the second time to boycott the elections of the Constituent Assembly for simple reasons, which I'm going to outline briefly. I believe that those reasons are visible in the draft constitution we are looking at as of now, and in the crisis surrounding the drafting process of Egypt's new constitution. We decided to withdraw from the first assembly and to boycott the elections of the second, which continues to exist up until now, for different reasons. Number one, and here's the reference is to liberal forces and liberal parliamentarians in Egypt, we saw that Islamists were creating an assembly of their own, an assembly in which the Islamists, the political Islam component, was going to be dominant in a way which is eminent as of now. We decided to withdraw and to boycott the elections because we saw a dominance of political parties and party politicians in a constituent assembly which should have been representative of all Egyptians, of different sectors of our society. It's not true that constituent assemblies become a domain for party dominance, for political party domination, and we saw a clear domination of political parties in the constituent assembly. We were unsatisfied with the procedures devised for the assembly, an assembly of 100 members to pass constitutional articles based on consensus, A, B, a two-thirds majority, C, a 57% majority, which was clearly going to go in the direction of the strong representation of the Muslim Brotherhood as well as of Salafi groups, the two major forces within the Islamist spectrum, within the political Islam spectrum, that they were bound to take it in their way. And for additional reasons, such as the marginalization of women and the representation in the Constituent Assembly, less than 5% representation as of now, and for the marginalization of the representation of non-Muslims in Egypt in the Assembly. And finally, because once again, the Constituent Assembly was created based on a process of negotiations between political actors which did not reach its ultimate ends. It was dominated by the heavy weight of Islamists in the former People's Assembly, in the dissolved People's Assembly, and their current domination in the existing, continues to exist, Shura Council, the second chamber of the Egyptian Parliament. So different deficits of the Constituent Assembly, to my mind, have led to the current draft which we are looking at, and where I'm going to focus my presentation on. And I would like to outline 5 troubling issues in the current draft of the Egyptian Constitution, and I'm referring, and Nathan Brown will appreciate the accuracy, I am referring to the draft of October 24, released and visible and accessible on the website of the Constituent Assembly, www.dustur.eg.org. 5 big troubling issues. Number 1, with regard to personal rights and freedoms, the current draft of the Constitution eats away from the principle of equality between women and men, and the principle of equality between Muslims and non-Muslims. The reference is primarily to Article 68 in the second chapter of the Constitution, in which equality is related to a phrase, and here I'm quoting, to the rulings of the Islamic Sharia. And the reference is not to the principles of Sharia, as it is in Article 2 in the current draft constitution, and as it has been in Egypt since 1982, in the previous constitution governing us until the revolution, the 1971 constitution, referring to the principles of Islamic Sharia as the prime source of legislation. The reference is in Article 62 to the rulings, ahkam, of the Islamic Sharia. And of course, it does not take much knowledge to know that what we mean by the teachings and rulings of Sharia is a highly contested issue. And unlike the reference to principles of Sharia, which has been consensus-based in Egypt throughout the last 3 decades, and where we have a body coming out of the Supreme Constitutional Court, as well as of Al-Azhar, the official religious establishment, outlining what does that mean for legislative purposes, we do not have the same body and we do not have the same clarity with regard to the rulings, ahkam, Sharia al-Islamiyya. And what frightens liberals in Egypt is the fact that many Islamist members of the Constituent Assembly have been interpreting that reference in a way which eats away from equality between women and men, all the way from personal freedoms of women up to women's eligibility to run for political positions such as the presidency, prime ministership, minister positions, as well as governors' positions. And the same goes for non-Muslims as well. So we have a first problematic issue related to personal freedoms and political rights, where those rights, especially of women and non-Muslims, are not guaranteed and safeguarded in the Constitution in the current draft. The second troubling issue is how the complex religion, state, and politics is managed, is engineered in the new draft Constitution. And here I'm referring to, for those who are reading the different drafts or are following the different drafts, I'm referring to Chapter 1, primarily on the state and society. The engineering of the relationship between state, religion, and politics has different, in the phrasing, different ambiguities which might open up the space in Egypt for the development of a religious-based state. I am referring to Article number 4, once again in Chapter 1 on Al-Azhar, on the official religious establishment, stating that Al-Azhar's opinion is to be consulted with regard to different legislative issues pertaining to the Islamic Sharia, without outlining who is going to ask for Al-Azhar's opinion. Is it going to be the legislature, parliament, or is it going to be the judicial branch of government, or is it up to any Egyptian citizen to go and consult with Al-Azhar with regard to different legislative matters pertaining to Islamic Sharia, and what does that mean for the process of legislation in Egypt? In earlier drafts, that Article 4 had Al-Azhar's role in more of a compelling manner, stipulating that Al-Azhar should be consulted and that Al-Azhar has an upper sovereignty, an interpretation sovereignty with regard to what Sharia means for the legislative process in Egypt. That is no longer with us in the current draft, but once again, the articulation and stipulations of Article 4 are quite problematic. Secondly, we have in the last chapter, Chapter 5, Article 220, interpreting what principles of Sharia mean in a way which moves beyond what has been consensus-based in Egypt throughout the last decades. And finally, with regard to the complex state, religion, and politics, we no longer have the ban on parties based on a religious frame of reference, as it has been the case in Egypt with regard to the 1971 constitution, as well as the Constitutional Declaration of March 2011 that has governed Egyptian politics throughout the last 2 years. Not that stipulation of banning political parties established on a religious frame of reference did work out in reality. We do have political parties, legal political parties, established clearly with a religious frame of reference. However, to lift that ban from the constitution opens up the door in Egypt for more inclusion, unorganized and unsystematized inclusion of religion in politics. And the principle of separation between religion and politics is no longer respected. The third issue, which is, to my mind, because our Islamist friends in Egypt keep telling us that, well, we focus only on personal freedoms, on women's rights, and on equality among citizens, and on issues pertaining to religion and the state. I mean, not that those issues are minor important in a constitution. They are crucial for a constitution if we are seriously interested in building a democratic state and society. But it's not true that we only focus or that we are only preoccupied with issues pertaining to personal freedoms and to the complex state, religion, and politics. Let me shift to the third issue, which is as problematic in the draft constitution, which is the engineering of the new political system. Based on the current draft constitution, Egypt's president continues to have the same prerogatives and authorities which Egyptian presidents did have since 1954. We continue to have not simply a presidential system, but an undemocratic presidential system where the president has vast authorities and prerogatives unchecked. No oversight. Only one article on oversight with regard to the president on treason. And no clear stipulations of different checks and balances as to empower Parliament and the judicial branch of government and independent oversight institutions with regard to the president. Not only that, parliamentary prerogatives and authorities are being undermined in at least one article, which is Article 196, stipulating that the budget of the military establishment and legislation pertaining to the military establishment are to be discussed in an appointed council, in the so-called National Defense Council, and then the budget to be pushed to Parliament as one figure, which means that Parliament will not be able to discuss the budget of the military establishment seriously, and it necessitates an approval of that appointed council with regard to laws and legislation pertaining to the armed forces. So the principle of civil society, principle of the civil state, oversight of elected civilians vis-a-vis military and security institutions and establishments is not guaranteed. We continue to have an undemocratic presidential system with a diminished role of Parliament and with a special status of the military establishment, as if we did not go through what we did go throughout the last 6 decades. I have to run and speed up. 2 final issues, and I'll stop 1 minute each. The fourth problematic issue in the current draft constitution pertains to the system of local government. Once again, Egypt's one of the main reasons for Egypt's failure throughout the last decades to democratize, to open up its polity, has been the centralization of the Egyptian government and the lack of incentives for decentralization. If you look at the constitution of 1971 and you compare it to the current draft constitution, it is as if not a single year passed in between. We continue to have the same centralized local government, same centralized local administration system, no incentives for decentralization, governors to be appointed by the president, budget sovereignty with the central government, no real role with regard to governorates, and so on and so forth. So one of the greatest impediments of Egypt's democratization throughout the last 6 decades, which is the centralization of the government, continues to exist. Finally, with regard to the fifth issue, and once again to prove that we are not simply preoccupied with personal freedoms and women's rights only, issues pertaining to social and economic rights in the current draft constitution, and the reference is to the 2nd chapter on rights and freedoms. Issues pertaining to social and economic rights are not addressed in a way which corresponds to the popular demand on social justice in Egypt. Social and economic rights, education, healthcare, social safety networks, and so on and so forth are not safeguarded in a way which would be conducive to a liberal market economy, socially responsible. They are addressed in a way which eats away from what Egyptians did have in the last 6 decades in an unprecedented manner. Those are five big issues in the draft constitution, and as a result, liberal forces outside of the Constituent Assembly continue their struggle for newly forming the assembly and for a better constitution, which Egypt does deserve after its democratic revolution. And liberal forces inside the assembly have threatened, as of today, in fact, that they are going to withdraw unless different adjustments are going to take place in the current draft constitution addressing the 5 issues which I outlined, and unless the Constituent Assembly is extended time-wise in its work with 3 additional months to avoid, as we say in Egypt, to avoid prematurely getting done with the constitution without real discussion and without offering Egyptians a constitution which they deserve after a democratic revolution. Thank you very much.